Hi, I'm Mike Siemsen, Mike Siemsen School of Woodworking. I recently hosted a video with Lost Art Press called The Naked Woodworker, in which we refurbished a bunch of used tools, and we also built a Nicholson-style workbench like this that had no vices. And I'd like to go a little over work holding with you on this bench to show how you can use a bench with no vices and not have a lot of problems with that. It's actually pretty simple. The key to work holding on a bench like this is the hold fast. I happen to have an original hold fast here from the early days of woodworking, and you can see that holds pretty well. And I also have the original mallet to go with it. They came as a set. You'll find that the metal ones work a little better. They're a little more efficient. Here's a blacksmith made one. Here's one that you can get from Gramercy Tools, tools for working wood. They are very efficient at holding. You need this, and you will also need a mallet to strike them with. The key things that you'll want to do at your workbench are flatten the faces of boards, plane the edges of boards, plane the end grain, and cut some joints like dovetails and mortise and tenons. So we're going to go over the work holding for all that and also cover a little bit on planing with fence planes and possibly making moldings. So let's get started. We're going to grab a board or two here, and we're going to do some edge planing. And one thing to keep in mind is that a bench there isn't a standard size bench. The height of the bench depends on the woodworker, and the length of the bench depends a lot on the size of stock that you're going to work. So this material here will easily fit on this bench. But if I had a 7 or 8 foot board, it would be too long and it wouldn't fit the bench. And then I would need a larger bench like the one in the background that is able to hold bigger pieces of material. So the scale of your work affects the scale of your bench. The bigger your work, the bigger your bench. The first thing we're going to do here is we're going to plane the edge of this board. And all we have to do is stick it in here. We can use a hold fast if we want. You don't always need to, but it gives you a little bit more solid work holding. And then we would grab our plane and just plane off that edge. And you can plane stock all the way down to here, this wide. So you could put a door in here, a cabinet door. There's a lot of options that you could use. This stops being efficient when the piece that you're planing becomes too narrow. So like this piece here will still work in here. And I'll be able to plane the edge of this without too much trouble. But you want to be watchful that the piece that you're planing doesn't flex here. I'm going to grab a narrower piece, and you'll see that this piece would flex underneath the load of the plane, so you wouldn't necessarily get it straight. So to plane a thinner piece of stock, you would push up a planing stop here, and then you could plane here, and the bench is now supporting the stock rather than it just being supported by 2 pins. So the flatness and straightness of your bench top helps you. You may find that if the piece of wood you're planing has a bow in it this way or the other way, a crown, that you could put a shim under here to keep it from bowing away from you so you can support it better as you're planing. And the same would be true if you were planing flat stock. So you can see that it's not too difficult to plane the edges of boards of varying widths and lengths. If this was a shorter piece, I could move closer up to here. See, now here I wouldn't reach my hole, so that could be a dilemma. But what I can do is put another piece under here like that. See, now it's longer. I can still use my hold fast if I want to clamp it. And plane the edge of that piece. I guess that won't even grip, so we'll just plane it. Using a different thickness of stick like this also can help you adjust the height of this, especially when you get up to these thinner sections. So you might find that using a 3/4 or 1 inch stick might be useful. There is a stick running up the middle of the bench, and I tend to use it for that, is to take this stick out of the center, and I can lay that on top of there like that and get 3/4 of an inch. Or I can stand it up like this, and I've sawn this out to 1 1/4 inches. So it raises me up just a little bit higher to adjust the height of the board that I'm using on the side of the bench. Okay, now we're going to be talking about flattening stock. And it's very important that the top of your bench be flat. And we're going to be using planing stops here on the end of the bench. You can see one here has been taken out. I've buried these in the end of the bench. This is a small bench. I've made some kind of lightweight stops here. You can get a feel for what they look like. And this is a much heavier stop here that came off the longer, bigger bench. And this is made from just a large piece of angle iron that I sawed off and filed it, made some teeth in it. And you can make most of these things yourself, but they also are available, I believe, out in the world, or you could have a blacksmith make that for you. And these are just buried into the bench top so they're flush. So we want to flatten boards on our bench. So how do you do that without a vise? Well, we do have this stick up the center of our bench, which allows us to put a board up against it like that. We bring up our planing stop, push our board up against it, and then we're readily able to plane off the face of the board. We're able to plane in the same direction as the board. And it lays there and behaves itself. If we have wider stock, what do? Well, a board this width, you could probably do it the same way that we just did. With this board here, I'd probably use this stop and shove that up against there and plane this off. But I could also use a device called a doe's foot to hold this. Or I could also clamp my stick way back here. If I had a wider board yet, I could clamp this stick back against my holdfasts, and I'll get a holdfast out here. So I could lay this stick that's in the center of the bench there, and I could plane up against those. Here you have to be careful that you don't hit the iron part of the holdfast, so you'd want that out of your way. But you can also use what's called the doe's foot. And the doe's foot is basically a batten. And I have 2 of them here. It's just a batten with a notch in it. And I make them about the width of my bench because there's times when I'll put them in a position like right here and put it up against 2 of these stops. And I may want to plane against that for some reason. But I'm going to use them to hold this board here to plane. I'm going to bring up my stop here, and I'm going to shove my board up against it, give it a good bump, and then I'm going to take my notched board here and put it on my bench, and I'm going to lock that in place with my holdfast, and now I can plane that off quite readily. I can also plane in the direction of the material, like this. And it holds it pretty solidly from moving. You will find that when you plane with these planes and using these kind of stops where the boards are loose, you get a little information back from your lumber. So if you pull backwards, and here I'm caught pretty well, but if I was planing up just against a stick, like this, I would find that when the question is, do you raise your plane up when you pull it backwards? And if you didn't, it would pull the board out away from there. So these questions get answered automatically, because the boards are loose. So when you plane, you're going to have to take some of the load off the plane when you back up, or it's going to pull the board back with it. And so you get that information right off the bat. Another thing you'll find is if you're planing a board in this position, is, switch planes, that one's a little heavy. You'll find that when you plane a board in this position, that it's balanced there. If I plane too hard on one side or something, it wants to tip over. And if I don't keep pressure on the back of the plane when I leave, the board jumps up like this. And so that shows me that I'm actually not planing correctly. If I get it jumping up like that, I'm not planing, holding my plane correctly. And so it's jumping up out of there, see? But if I'm using my plane correctly, it'll stay flat. So you get some information back from your material when it's loose on the bench like this. Another method of using your battens would be to hold, like here I'm going to do a really wide board now with this stick, not the batten, because I want to clean off most of this crud. And this board is so wide, see, I can't get at any of my hold fast holes or anything there, but I can take this stick out of the middle and I can walk back here, and now I'm going to hold this stick up here. And I've got a hold fast hole here in the back of the bench. And that gives me a planing stop now, the full width of my bench, so that I can plane off a big board like this one. You can see that's a little springy, so maybe I'd want my hold fast closer to home. Here, there's another hole here, and that would take care of that. Keep in mind, if you have shavings on your bench and you're sweeping it with your hand, don't sweep them this way. Sweep them across this way, and then you won't get splinters from your bench. It's much more pleasant that way. And also watch out for those planing stops, because they can grab you too. So now I'm going to set up a board here, and I'm going to plow a groove in it with a plow plane. So now I want to grab my battens. I'm going to use them as battens now rather than as doe's feet. I'm going to push that up against the cleaning stop here. Grab a hold fast. You can see I can adjust the width anywhere along here that I want. And I want it to be that wide. So this board is now, it's just loose here, but I have enough room here that my fenced plane is hanging off the end of the bench, so that won't interfere, and I can just plane a groove very readily. In the face of this board. If I wanted to plane a groove in the edge of the board, then I would go back to using it in this manner. And again, then you can all right, and here we are. We're going to be cutting a tenon on the end of a board, and then we're also going to be cutting a mortise. One of the things is, how do you hold wood of various widths to cut a tenon on the end? So I have some sample boards here of various widths, and what we do is we put our piece of wood in here like this, and you can angle it across so it hits both of these. And then we can, if it's tall, run it up down to the floor. But there you can see I've got this fastened pretty solidly to my bench. And I can easily saw on here. If I take my gauge here, I can gauge some nice lines. And I can take my tenon saw and I would saw down to my baseline. You can saw the corners out this way if you want. You can saw right these two corners. Saw down to your baseline, and then turn the board around. And saw out these two corners down to your baseline. And there you have your tenon saw now. Now if you were sawing tenons in a board of various width, this is a narrower piece. If you had a wider piece, this would still work. It's pretty vertical, that wouldn't be a problem. But you could also move it here if you wanted to and angle it more, or even back to here. That's a little bit much. But putting it here, you could easily saw a tenon on that board, and if you even had a wider one to saw, you could then go still here or here. If your board is shorter, you might even end up coming up into here to grab it, but you can see that you have options for holding different widths of boards for cutting a tenon on them. Now if you're going to chop a mortise in your piece, we would bring that up on the bench here. We've got our scribe line nicely scribed on here. And this is probably how you'd do it anyways, but we're just going to use a holdfast again to clamp the board to the bench. And then we would chop out our mortise. So you get the general idea. Now we want to saw off these shoulders. So how do we do that? Well, we can use a bench hook, which is a pretty standard device on a workbench, and take our saw and saw off our shoulder. Or we could bring this stick up again. It's high enough on this material that we could saw through that way. We could also just saw off the end there and accomplish the same task. So we're able to cut the shoulders of our tenons. If you wanted to saw a wide board or rip a wide board, we can do that as well. If we were wanting to saw the end off of a board like this, we could again put it up against this planing stop here, that center stick, and we could grab our cross-cut saw. And pretty easily saw off the end of a board. Now, I typically do these operations on sawhorses, but it's easily accomplished on your workbench as well. A wider board, you could use similar manners of holding it with battens or things and enable yourself to do that. If you wanted to rip this board, we can just clamp it right to the bench top like this. We're going to use 2 holdfasts. And that holds it down securely. And we don't have a line on here, but I can imagine one. I'm just going to saw a 1/4 inch off the edge here. So you can see it's not too difficult to rip here as well. And now that we've got this thin stick, how do you plane that? Well, again, we're going to go to our holdfast. If we wanted to clean the edge of that up, we would have to just grab it by the end here like that. And that will hold it securely while we plane the face of it. Well, I'll say it again. There's a knot here which is giving me a little trouble. And that'll hold it securely. So we can plane our stick thinner. Because if you tried to plane the other way, it would just break the stick. Then you have to turn it around, clamp it again, and then plane the other way. And it allows you to plane the piece in tension. Now we're going to talk a little bit about planing end grain. Here you can see I'm using a shooting board and I'm just planing it off. That's a pretty standard method of doing this. I'm actually just using the same bench hook that I use when I saw. And then we're also going to show you how to set up to saw dovetails. So you saw you can shoot a thin board like this, but if you wanted to plane the end of a larger board, like on the order of this one, we could accomplish that by putting it here in our crochet. That's what this stick here is, or a crocket, or a crotch, or whatever, crooked stick, whatever you want to call it. So we're going to clamp this board to the bench like this. And we're going to just plane it. Now in this case I could probably walk around and plane back, but you can't always. It's always good to plane up against your stop. So we're just going to turn it around and plane back from the other way. And you really don't want to plane off the end anyways, so you get the general idea. Now we're going to set up for dovetailing. And hanging on the end here, I have just a block of wood here. It has a hole in it so I can hang it. This face is flat, and I'm going to use it like a vise. I'm just going to mount it on my bench here. Like that. It just sits on these dowels. And then I'm going to put my hold fast in here so I can clamp it up. I'm going to grab my other hold fast. For this end, and I have some scrap stock here that's the same thickness as the material I'm going to be dovetailing. And I'm just going to put that scrap right in at this peg here, this dowel, and I'm going to put my hold fast against there, and I want to crowd my hold fast to the front side of that and clamp it. And now this board is held fast in there, but I can still get my piece in and out and then use this one to clamp it up. So then we would just mark our gauge line here on our piece to be dovetailed. Put it in our chop here. And then I can grab my saw and I can saw my dovetails. There's my half pins. And I can cut my tails. So you can see it easily holds what I want to do to saw a dovetail. I can saw them different widths, whatever you want to do. It's nothing too tricky. And then I can chop my waist. Now when you're chopping your dovetail waist, your hold fasts come in handy as well, because now I can hold fast my material to my bench. And I can even stack my boards. I could stack them 3, 4, 5 high, whatever it takes here to dovetail when I want to chop out my waist. And this is the wrong size chisel, but I will just bull ahead. So you get the idea that you can easily clamp and hold work for dovetailing. You can also clamp pieces in here and plane the end grain if they're not too big. But you do have a form of a vise here that's just dependent on hold fast and a chop. If you want to take it a little farther, you can make a twin screw vise like this, which is a loose vise that you can sit on top of your bench. Use your hold fast to clamp it to the bench top and use that as a vise as well for dovetailing. But now you have a vise on your bench, and we're not talking about viseless woodworking anymore. I want you to know I don't have anything against vices on benches. This just happens to be a way to work without a vise. I have plenty of vices on other benches in my shop, and I use them regularly. But I find this is a very interesting method of working. It also gives you some feedback as you're working. And it is, I like to encourage people to get started in woodworking without spending all their money, you know, and have a few dollars left to, you know, buy their favorite malt beverage. If you are interested and haven't seen it already, I do have, like I said, a video with Lost Art Press, The Naked Woodworker. I've also made a video with Craftsy.com called Woodworking Essentials, Benches and Boxes by Mike Siemsen. And in there we make benches and boxes. It's pretty basic. And I would think that I want to thank you for paying attention thus far. And I want you to know that this has been a public service announcement brought to you by the makers of No Vice at All.